But before we even get into the day of trial, I got to tell you, Andrew, during the criminal pretrial discovery process, the battle that we had to go through just to get the hospital records, it was insane. It took months. There was so much fighting just to get the records. The judge had to get involved and had to sign these orders. Remember how I was telling you that we were demanding a second opinion, right? Well, during the pretrial discovery process, once we started to get the majority of the records, we found the child abuse doctor's attempt at another opinion. She emailed this leading pediatric eye doctor, and she titled the email, "Tough Case." She asked this doctor a question about high blood platelets and blood clotting issues that my daughter was found to have. This was discovered through lab work, right? So basically, this doctor emails her back and says the blood clotting throws all the retinal hemorrhages into question for her theory of shaken baby syndrome. And we had no idea that she did this. She never told us that she attempted to contact this doctor. But what's really interesting is, what does she do with this information and this opinion? She doesn't tell anyone about the findings. Literally, once this doctor's opinion differs with her narrative, she stops communicating with him altogether. And then she never tells any of us about the opinion. And the only reason we got this is through legal pretrial court discovery. And the fight we had to go through to get the rest of the records, and this email and the full medical record, was nuts. The hospital kept refusing to give us the whole record, and my attorney knew. He was experienced. He could look at it and say, this isn't the whole record. This baby was in the hospital for 2 weeks, you know? This just took months. The judge actually had to issue a subpoena to the hospital records clerk and threaten her with a bench warrant to comply in giving us the full record. And that same hospital records clerk was actually found in contempt of court in our case. I remember thinking, is this the United States of America? Because I feel like I'm in a third world country right now. So finally we get to the criminal trial. It lasted almost 2 weeks. And again, we called many expert doctors in this trial. We even had 2 child abuse pediatricians from the state of Michigan who testified in my defense. They said that with Naomi's birth trauma and all her other medical findings that were in the record, that there was no way that they could diagnose shaken baby syndrome with her traumatic birth and everything that was going on. And of course, once again, the prosecutor tried to discredit all these doctors as hired guns and that they never treated my daughter. I remember in closing arguments, my attorney said, how many doctors have to be wrong for this child abuse pediatrician to be right? And of course, the prosecutor went with the emotional argument because they didn't have anything but circumstantial theories in their case, right? So the prosecutor's narrative in closing was, something happened to this baby, so you must err on the side of caution and you must convict. So the jury deliberated for 3.5 days, and we could tell that they were struggling, and we even found out later that they were split. But after 3.5 days, they came back with a guilty verdict.
How in the world did they ever find that it was a guilty verdict?
Yeah, I think emotional arguments win the day in these cases.
It does. They just, yeah. And when it comes to kids in cases like this, and then they see, a man sitting there, you're automatically guilty. I mean, in my case, I had a couple of jurors in my jury pool that were just looking at me like they just wanted to drive a truck over me, and I'm like, well, she already thinks I'm guilty. You could tell just by looking at the jury. But man. So what were you feeling at that point? I mean,
well,
guilty verdict. What did that do to you?
Yeah, I mean, as you know, right, it was horrible. It was an earth-shattering day, right? Because I lost so much faith in the government and our system of justice. I mean, yeah, to be accused of hurting a person that you would literally die for, lay down your life for, it's not possible to reconcile that in your head, you know? I was broken, man. I was just broken after that.
So after the trial and they found you guilty, did they take you right into custody at that time?
No, they didn't. But I ended up wishing that they would have because of what happens next. So I got to tell you, the reason I wish they would have taken me into custody is because the day of the verdict that night, a CPS worker showed up at our family home with 3 police officers. They had no warrant. They just wanted to check and see if I was violating the no contact order since, a guilty verdict. What has he got to lose? Maybe he'll go see his daughter, right? So we had surveillance cameras set up in our home, and those were set up after they accused us. We were, for my wife's protection, we're like, we're going to have a camera in every room of the house from now on until our daughter can speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we had cameras set up in the house. So,
okay.
Yeah. And of course,
Smart move.
Of course, I'm not there, right? My wife is up visiting me where I was living with friends, and my parents were watching the baby. So I was like 15 miles away, and I had no intention of ever putting my wife and daughter at risk again of being separated, right? So, but this government harassment just continued. Even though my wife was cleared and CPS had no jurisdiction, they acted like they had a right to come into our home. My wife's attorney ended up telling her, hey, you and your daughter need to leave the state until your husband's sentencing, So at that point,
the state,
just so that the harassment would end,
Yeah.
Because they're the government overreach, it was insane, So at that point, I went into the police department the next day and talked to the detective in my case, and I said, hey man, put an ankle bracelet on me. I'll wear an ankle tracker so you guys can track my whereabouts. I just need you to stop showing up at my wife and daughter's home and harassing them. You can track wherever I'm at. And he said he couldn't do that. A judge had to order that, and he didn't have the authority to do it. And I understand that. But then I said, fine, take me to jail. Take me to jail. I'll surrender my bond. You can hold me in jail, and I'll wait out my sentencing in jail. And they weren't interested in any of this. It felt like they just wanted to continue to harass us.
Man, that's crazy.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Well, tell me about the day you were sentenced.
Well, again, I'm facing up to 10 years in prison. So I showed up in court and for the sentencing hearing, and there were supporters lining the sidewalk in the parking lots with signs. They were protesting, and then the courtroom was packed with friends and family.
Okay.
I had fellow pilot coworkers who showed up in uniform.
Wow.
So we had a lot of support. So the judge ended up taking what was called a downward departure in my sentencing. She gave me the lightest sentence she possibly could. She sentenced me to 1 year in county jail with 2 years probation. So I was led away in handcuffs and taken into custody and off to jail.
Oh, man. So a year in county.
Yep.
Anybody's ever experienced county jail, and it's been in a year in there feels like 20.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear your experience.
Yeah. So I get booked into jail. I spent several hours in an intake cell with a bunch of other guys that were waiting to be placed in the jail. And then they ended up putting me in a solitary confinement cell. This cell had a sink and a toilet and a bed. There was no phone, no TV, no books. And then I found out that I was supposed to get an hour of out time every day. And I was in this cell for like the first 5 days. So they would call me over the speaker in my cell at 3 a.m. and say, hey, do you want your out time? And finally, by like the second day, I learned that if I wanted my out time, I just had to take it whenever they gave it, right? So I'm out there on my out time. It's 3 o'clock in the morning, and my out time is in the intake lobby of the jail. Yeah. So they have these pay phones. So I go to use the phone to finally call home, but the phones are turned off at night. I can't even use the phone. So I said, hey, the phones aren't working. And they say, no, the phones are turned off at night. So I said, hey, can I get some out time when I can call home, actually make a phone call and call my family? I didn't have commissary yet. It was a tough first few days, but they finally moved me into a cell where I still had a single cell, but it opened up into like a shared day room. And there was another guy in a cell next to me. So we had this shared day room with a phone and a TV and a table and a shower. So I was able to call home. One of the coolest things, though, that happened in jail, a few days after I was sentenced, I was visited by 2 attorneys from the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic. They told me they'd been following my case and that they wanted to take my case on direct appeal pro bono. This was huge for us because we were out of money. We had drained our 401ks, and with 2 trials, it just left us broke.
And that's another thing people need to understand.
Yeah.
Is how easy it is to get into a situation like this.
Right.
And how expensive it gets.
Yeah.
Just to get to where you got.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I had. Yeah.
And people not having any money or any way to afford a real attorney.
Yeah.
They just railroad you.
Totally. Right, Andrew. And you think in my case, I had a career. I was an airline pilot, right? So I had some money. I definitely wasn't a rich man, but I had some money at least to put down. I had 50 grand that I could pull out of 401ks to give the attorney like his retainer fees and stuff, right? But the final bill ended up being almost $300,000, But for us, thankfully, we had a support system. We had friends and family, even complete strangers that came alongside us, and they paid the rest of our legal bills. We didn't owe anything. But, for somebody who's poor or doesn't have resources, they get a public defender. The budget for experts for a public defender, you're not getting any experts. You're not getting anything. You're not going to get any defense. And I get a robust defense, right? And I still lose. And, we'll get to that point where what it took to become exonerated and declared innocent. But, you can put up the most robust defense with great doctors and leading experts and a good attorney. And you can argue against the junk science and all that. But the emotional argument still wins over the science. And from your case,
Yep. Every time.
Every time.
Because the science is boring.
Yeah. I watched it. I'm sure you did too in your trial, but in my trial, I could just see the jury falling asleep.
Mine was falling asleep. Yeah.
Literally.
I had 2 falling asleep, listening to the expert witnesses.
Your life's on the line. Yeah.
Listen to all this medical jargon. Yep. They're just, they don't care.
It's crazy, man.
It's unreal. It's, the justice system, the medical system, it needs a big change.
Yeah. And at some point in this program, we want to have lawmakers from Texas on here, and we're going to talk to them about new bills and laws that can be created to stop this nonsense. So, having the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic on our side was incredible. I had fellow airline pilot brothers and other friends and family who came alongside and literally gave my wife money every month to take care of her and my daughter while I was incarcerated. So we had some good friends. We had some great family support. And I think about guys who don't have that, right? And they go through this stuff, and man, That's part of the reason why we're doing this too, right? Because there are so many people out there that don't have a support system that I had, and that I think everybody deserves when they're facing stuff like this, you know? It's tough. So, you know, I'm in jail, and the toughest part of jail is I'm still facing a parental rights trial, and CPS is still moving full speed ahead trying to terminate my parental rights. One thing that really helped us during my time in jail was we were on the Dr. Phil show, and Dr. Phil really advocated for us and our story, and it hit the news nationally. So it was crazy because all of a sudden in jail, everybody knows who I am, right? They saw the Dr. Phil show on TV, and the inmates and the guards, they're coming up to me and approaching me, and other inmates are saying, "Man, you're going home any day, man. You're going home." They would come up to me and say, like, "Hey, man, I screwed up. I belong here. I did something wrong, but man, you didn't do anything. You're out of here. You're getting home any day." And you know, I wish it were that simple, but that's not how things work. And you know, guards were coming up to me and telling me I got railroaded and I didn't belong there. One of the things that happened from all this media pressure is the prosecutor's office ended up backing off being the attorneys to represent CPS in my case. So CPS ended up having to hire outside counsel to represent them. So this news coverage, it became political. They didn't want any part of the parental rights trial anymore. So then, you know, we get to the parental rights trial and the judge is posturing the same way. She's ruling in my favor to protect my parental rights. And that meant that after I served out my sentence, that I would be put into what's called a family reunification plan, and that we could finally be together again as a family.
Finally, a victory. So once you were released, do you get to see your daughter? Or how long did you have between time you getting out to actually being back with your daughter?
I lost 2 years with her, you know, so she was 2 months old when all this happened, and almost 2 years old, so nearly 2 years. So finally getting to see her and hold her again, it was one of the best days of my life. But the thing that is always the rub, right, is we'll never get back the 2 years that the government stole from our family, you know? They stole that time from us. No amount of money, nothing they can do will ever get that back.
I mean, taking your brand new baby away from you because of thinking it's child abuse without, you know, oh man. I mean, just the whole case.
Right. So, you know, at this point, I'm out and we're just thinking we just got to get through this family reunification plan. We just knew that we had to jump through all CPS's hoops and get the government out of our lives.
Did you get to go home after jail? Did you have to go back to your friends or?
So coming home after incarceration was a process, man, because of this family reunification plan. I couldn't come home immediately. I had to stay with friends. Then I would get some day visits. I could come over certain days of the week to see my daughter, and then it moved into me having some overnight visits, weekends, and then finally fully back together, reunification plan complete. We had to go to a final court hearing and verify that we had followed all the rules and done everything we were supposed to do. So yeah, it was a process. But once I finally returned home, it's weird because I'm sure you remember this. When you're doing time, your guard's up, right? You have to keep your guard up because you have to keep yourself focused on doing your time well and following all the rules, not just the rules that the guards have, but the rules for keeping yourself safe inside, right? So all that stuff, it's like when I finally got home, I didn't realize this immediately, but
It's called being institutionalized, and it can happen real fast. And no matter how much you tell yourself, I'll never get institutionalized, the longer you stay there, the quicker it happens. You don't realize it, of course, until you get out back in the real world, and you're like, man.
You're right, Andrew. I was not ready for that. And because I got home and I started having nightmares, it would start off back in the back of that ambulance. And then I'd be in the back of that ambulance, and then it would switch to me being in my jail cell. And I would wake up screaming in a state of panic and fear. And I remember my wife was thinking, what is the matter with this guy?
Yeah, night terrors.
Yeah, night terrors, PTSD. I didn't know what was wrong with me. I thought, what? Shouldn't this be the happy time now? What is happening right now? So as a pilot, the FAA required me to go through psychological testing and evaluations to see if I was fit to fly medically. So I had 2 of these psychological evaluations, and both doctors diagnosed me with PTSD from the ordeal that our family had gone through, you know? So the airline that I was working for fired me because I was a convicted felon. And in the process starts, right? The appeals. The University of Michigan Innocence Clinic, they're filing appeals through all levels of the courts. They're trying to get me new hearings, and the courts just keep denying any relief in my case. As you know better than anyone, it's really difficult to overturn a conviction.
Yeah, well, that's nuts. So let's go back and say how you got exonerated exactly.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question, right? Because at this point, it wasn't looking good. I mean, all my appeals were just getting denied on every level. But 7 years after my release, the Michigan Attorney General's office formed a conviction integrity unit, and they took a look at my case, and it was under their review for 3 years. And then finally, 10 years after all this happened, in November of 2024, the Michigan Attorney General's Conviction Integrity Unit and the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic were able to get my conviction overturned. They sent a motion back to the original judge. She signed it, and I was declared innocent. You know, I was declared innocent because no crime occurred. We meet other exonerees where a crime occurred and they get the wrong guy, right? For us, there was no crime, right? There were medical misdiagnoses, birth trauma, so no crime even occurred. And it's the same thing for people like Robert Robertson, who's on death row, accused of killing his daughter, and the medical records show that no crime occurred. Yeah, so it's like this.
I mean, other than malpractice.
Yeah, the crime was from the hospital.
Right.
Exactly.
Cover it up and blame you.
Exactly.
This is happening so often.
Yep.
So how has it been after exoneration finally?
Right.
After these long 10 years, I know.
So my daughter is now 12 years old. She's made a full recovery from birth trauma. And my wife's a stay-at-home mom, and I work as a pilot instructor for a major airline here in Texas. But I got to tell you, this experience, as you know, it changes you. You don't get to be the same person after you go through something like this.
So tell me, why did you want to do this? Tell your story and start this podcast with me.
Well, yeah, you know, we were sitting there doing a podcast together in a podcast studio, The Last Appeal with Lester Holt. And, you know, you looked over and said, hey, man, we should do a podcast. You know, I thought about it and I was like, you know what? He's right. We should do this because it gets back to a lot of the things that you just said, right? I want to tell everyone this story because, like you've already said, our main message here that everyone needs to know is that this can happen to anyone, right? You know, some of the ways that this has changed me Before this happened, I thought that if someone was accused of something and they ended up in court, that they were probably guilty and deserved what they had coming to them. And I'm ashamed that I was so blinded by that back then. I just want people to know that this can happen to anyone. I think for people to realize that we can't just assume because someone's in court that they're guilty. People need to stop and think, because this can happen to you. It happened to me, it happened to Andrew, and it can happen to anyone. And this is why, since I've been exonerated, this is why I fight for the innocent. Because I can't sit still knowing that every day, I just talked to a mom last night on the phone who's going through this, I have parents that call me all the time that are being falsely accused. So I cannot sit by on the sideline while I know that parents and caregivers are being falsely accused when clear medical findings are ignored. When I was a convicted felon, I felt like I didn't have a voice, So now it's become a battle cry for me. When I wake up and my feet hit the floor, I say these words. I say, for those who can't. Every day, I'm fighting for those who can't. I didn't have a voice. And when I didn't have a voice, the University of Michigan Innocence Clinic fought for me. And they were my voice when I couldn't. I know how it felt to not have a voice. And I think for those out there who feel like they don't have a voice because they're going through something like this, we hear you. And we are here to speak for you. We are here to fight for you, for those who can't.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here on Unshaken Truth. Thank you for sharing your heartbreaking story.